Okay, Nathan Hill, welcome to The Sixth Dimension. This is your second interview. This time we're going to be talking about an unproduced script of yours that I had the chance to read. Before we get into that, how are you?
Good, my friend. Thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you for coming in at such short notice. Shall I mention that you are not at 100% the health?
This is a very poignant, moment because I do believe it's just dawned on me it's a full moon tonight, isn't it?
Is it?
I think it is. So here we are, full moon. I'm in recovery from surgery, first surgery I've ever had in my life, but I still have a clean bill of health. People need me on my feet, Sebastian, I think.
Well, yeah, almost everyone around you needs you on your feet. But the fact that you are in such good health, does that have anything to do with the ritual of sacrificing virgins? Or
look, lucky for you and I and everybody else, that stuff only goes on paper or celluloid.
Well, that's before we get started talking about this script you were kind enough to send me a copy because I begged you, because I like reading scripts.
I want to thank you for that because, for you to ask for one of my screenplays is a real compliment. People are, generally interested in what's immediate, whether it's the trailer or the movie itself or the short or whatever. And, to actually delve into someone's mind and read a screenplay is really, quite special. I guess with the scripts I've written that haven't been made into films yet, they've still got some kind of stigma to them. For example, my Addison script, has one Shriekfest. So even the scripts that I do have, and there's only a few of them, but they've all got some relevance. I don't have lazy scripts where I've just kind of started writing a treatment and it's just sitting in a drawer. Even my scripts are polished, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, you said this was in between your 12th and your 20th draft of this script, Black Mass, is that correct?
Yes, I think you've read maybe 17, 18, 19th draft, something like that. This is an interesting one. I think you'll enjoy this pod because we're going back to even pre-film school. So before I was even enrolled and had the kind of academic training, someone said to me, I think it was a friend who was passionate about film but didn't have enough energy to actually do it. I think was probably a bit more of a dreamer. But he said to me, I've read this amazing book by Sid Field called Screenplay Writing or Screenwriting. You probably know it, the Sid Field one.
Yeah, the 14 steps of the hero's journey, or?
Yes, I think that was it. So as soon as I picked it up, I couldn't put it down. And the thing I loved about it was that it was kind of like a course, because you'd have to do those exercises. So it would say to you, who's your lead character, for example, and then you'd have to go away and write an essay about the lead character and the backstory. And, before I knew it, I was writing, thousands of words, and I hadn't even got to the script yet, and I was like, this is an incredible process. By the time I actually wrote page one of the screenplay, man, I had just thousands of words on the backstory, every character in the story, what their character arcs were, who they were, what they were going to do, hypothetical questions, what would they do in certain situations. So, and this is actually, I guess, what ultimately would make you a better director on a screenplay in this kind of environment because you've done so much research. You just know the answer to every question, when you delve that deep. So, following that process and following the Sid Field course, I produced this screenplay called Black Mass. That was a working title. Fast forward now, obviously there's been a movie called Black Mass starring Johnny Depp. The funny thing is when that trailer came out, the first thing you saw was black, with the Black Mass writing in red. And a few of my friends actually assumed I'd finally made it and got funding. And then you saw Johnny Depp's face pop up and they went, no, I don't think that's the one. So that was kind of funny, but it also goes to show, because remember in our last pod we were talking about, when you're on the pulse and you kind of, you're making a film and then you see a shot or something pop up from your own consciousness or subconscious. This was one of those other crazy moments. I was like, well, it's taken me so long to try and get this film made, which hasn't been made. And then, yes, someone else has gone and made a movie with the same title. Eventually it'll happen. It always happens that way. Keeping in mind, though, the story is completely different. So I've got another working title now, which I'm not going to announce. But I do have another title now that one's been snapped up and that Johnny Depp film has been made. But the Black Mass screenplay, look, it was really, I guess technically the first serious full-length screenplay that I've actually ever written. and had spent, I must have spent 3 years on it before I'd even gone into film school, for God's sake. It was only, I think, last year where I thought, I'll test the water, I'll put it into competition. And I hadn't done a draft on it for bloody, 5 years or more, maybe 10. It got into the quarterfinals of Shriekfest. Wow. So that was really just as an experiment. So it's still got a little bit of weight today, even though it hasn't been made and I had come semi kind of somewhat abandoned it. The biggest compliment I had on the screenplay, my good friend and mentor, William Catt, who was the actor from the Greatest American Hero TV show.
And House.
And House. And
the 1986 one, not the one with Stephen Fry's mate. What's his name? Hugh Laurie.
And also Carrie. And also a surf film called Big Wednesday. They're kind of his big films.
Love Big Wednesday.
And we met during the casting process for Black Mass, when Black Mass did at one stage go into pre-production, and I envisioned him playing the father figure in this movie, Saul. Do you remember that character?
Yeah, of course. He's constantly drinking.
Yeah, that's right. The alcoholic father. That's right. And he's got a death wish. So so Saul, the father of Trent, and William Catt read the screenplay. He said to me, "That's one of the best character pieces I've ever read in my life." I mean, I had tingles down my spine. We're talking about someone that's in original Hollywood. His mother used to act in Perry Mason. The guy lives next door to Tom Selleck. Do you know what I mean? He was the runner-up to play Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars. You'll see his audition tape online with Kurt Russell as Han Solo. It was going to be Kurt Russell and William Catt, which is ironic too, Seb, because I don't know if you know, but I actually auditioned for Anakin Skywalker when the new films came out.
Really?
Around about 2000, episode 2.
There's so many sides of you that I didn't really know you.
And then I thought about William auditioning, and then I auditioned. I felt there was a real kinship. And a few people have said to me when they've seen photos of us together, they've actually assumed it's my dad because he's got blonde hair and blue eyes. There's actually this shot in Big Wednesday where I nearly fell off the chair because, in fact, I was with someone and they said, "Oh my God, is that you?" It's great to be in touch. I'm still in touch with Bill now. We Skype a bit and stuff like that. That's a great friendship that's come out of this screenplay that hasn't been made. But that's just one aspect of this overall Black Mass kind of enigma.
If this were to take another direction, become the next Insidious or the next Blair Witch.
I've watched, James Wan's career, having actually been, I was a bloody location scout for the Saw concept short film that actually eventually got them funding to make it as a feature, you know what I mean? And I remember at that time I was writing the Utterson screenplay and I was so engrossed in my own work. And I actually had, at that point in my life, I had 2 scripts come across my desk. Would I like to be a co-producer on? One of them was Saw and the other one was Wolf Creek. And I didn't even know what they were. Do you know what I mean? Can you imagine?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And now, obviously, they're blockbusters and these guys are world famous and their careers are absolutely blooming. Life's really strange because you can be engrossed in your own stuff. It's a really tricky one. Is it flattering that happened? Does it mean that I'm kind of in the same cesspool as these individuals? Does it mean that the choices I've made dictated my own path? And is that better or worse? I mean, there's just, it's almost philosophy. Do you know what I mean? You could debate these questions forever. But I think Coppola summed it up because he said, look, in life, it's all about the ones that you catch. Do you know what I mean? You will be in situations where you'll have even a few offers on the table and you just can't do them all. I saw a similar interview with Daniel Craig when he finally really cracked it with the second or third Bond film. And then all of a sudden all these directors wanted to work with him. And I remember seeing him in an interview and he was like almost in tears going, Jesus, I really want to work with all these guys. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, because time doesn't even permit. But I think what I've noticed in my own journey though is, I am building a catalogue of my own that I'm proud of, and I have an end game. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm making particular amount of films for a reason. I'm not kind of, willy-nilly going out making this film because I think it's going to be a blockbuster, and I'm not making this other one because I think it's going to do nothing. It's part of a slate. I'm building a landscape, but it's like a watered-down Tarantino version, because I do have characters that are similar in some of the scripts, and I have some characters you could almost imagine going into the other film. You were talking about screenplays. If we take Tarantino as an example, his screenplays are a big deal. I mean, the table read, or the rehearsed play reading, if you want to call it that, for The Hateful Eight is actually what got the movie made. It all comes down to the power of that individual, the charisma of that individual, but also the power of that screenplay. Because I've had directors that you and I even know that we would consider pretty good filmmakers, and they'll give me a screenplay and they'll say, Nath, can you read this? And I'm thinking to myself, this is pretty average, right? But then in their mind, it's amazing. And they'll go out and make it. And then I will give them kudos for that. And I'll say, well, good on you, because that's what I do when I get passionate about something I like. I will just go and do it. If I wake up every morning and I have a movie that I can't escape in my consciousness that's telling me to make it, I'm almost possessed by it, Seb. I kind of have to. I'm kind of against making movies just for the numbers or just for the hell of it. I think that's wrong, and I think you and I have talked about that before. Someone will put their hand up and go, no, I want to make a movie. I'm going to be a filmmaker, and they hustle and they get all these people together, and before you know it, you've got a cast of 80 or bloody 100 people, cast and crew, and they're all off and apparently making this film. It's happened recently, and, this guy's gone out and apparently he's got a novel or something that he's written, so he thinks that gives him some legitimacy, and he can go to these actors and stuff and say, oh, well, I've written a book and now I'm going to make a film, and, and they're like, oh, wow, and young talent, kind of believing anything because they're so, I guess, desperate for their own body of work to begin, and then all of a sudden, the film's not getting made. That to me is kind of wrong. You don't want to mislead people, and you don't want to just make a movie because you think that that's cool. Like it's got to have merit, and it's got to be in tune with the universe, and there's got to be a start, a middle, and end. It's a process. It's a journey, and if you're in it for the wrong reasons, then well, it's gonna show up. You're gonna get caught.
I mean, are there people in there just for the numbers?
I think there's people in it just for what they think fame is. I think there's people in it because they think it'll draw a certain amount of attention to themselves and they want attention. I mean, look, actors do need a certain amount of attention. That's why they're actors. They're looking for a bit of self-glorification or some respect from others, and that's great. People that have got talent are great to watch. That's why we want to watch movies. We want to see people that are kind of extraordinary. But I think when it's a bit pedestrian and you're kind of just doing it because you think you should or because someone kind of said, oh, let's just do it, I guess that's where I've got issues. It's kind of like the film school thing, like I'm in there's probably 40 students and maybe only, 2 or 3 of us has ended up actually in the industry. Those other 35 plus people, you kind of ask them what they're doing there, and some of the answers were absolutely ridiculous. People would say to me, oh, I don't know, I just, don't really know what else I want to do. And I'm like, okay, so let me get this straight. You don't know what you want to do. So you're going to rock up to a film school and just kind of like, be a pedestrian in amongst these other people that want to do it for the rest of their life. It's kind of wrong. And so I get passionate about this because I really think people need to, identify with themselves and their abilities and work on what they're good at. And, I'm certainly not someone running around saying that I'm a jack of all trades and that I'm the best at everything I do. I've never done that.
Well, you don't say it, but you are.
Well, thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
What was the impetus for Black Mass?
Black Mass, the screenplay, I think, as we've spoken before, with the origins of filmmaking, it was horror. And I particularly liked some of these occult thrillers and satanic horror films that had come out of the 60s and 70s, chiefly, I would say, being Rosemary's Baby. I also really liked The Devil's Reign, which was technically John Travolta's debut. Travolta was a featured extra. He had one line, and it was also a voiceover. And
I do like The Devil's Reign, yeah. With yeah, I've seen it. It's got a really depressing ending, and Ernest Borgnine's makeup is quite frightening, where he plays the half goat, half man. I think he's supposed to be Satan, but yeah. The thing
that I found out about the film that I couldn't believe was that Anton LaVey, who was the technical advisor on the movie, who was, the head of the Satanic Church at the time, was actually on set. and John Travolta turned 21 on set, and he poured him his first glass of champagne, apparently.
Really?
So,
I thought you were going to say he took his virginity or something like that.
So, it's just got this. That movie has just got so many bizarre, connotations that it just gets me going every time. Got a really good book here. It's from a filmmaker friend gave to me called The Satanic Screen. Just trying to see who the author is, because this is like a bloody Bible if people want to make this sort of stuff. Okay, it's actually, this is funny because the writer's actually Nicholas Schreck. So I don't know if that's a pun, but this book's amazing. It's a kind of an A to Z guide to the Satanic Screen, and it's all in there if you want to do this sort of stuff.
Brilliant, yeah. I'm a big fan of Satan on the Screen.
So am I, man. I mean, look, Rosemary's Baby, Polanski. I mean, you can't get much higher than that for drama when you've got these screenplays where, there's heavy drama, even almost soap opera drama. You've gone through 2 acts and you really get to know these characters and you kind of care for them now, and then it just goes horrifically wrong. That to me is entertaining. It's really turning it on its head and surprising the audience and shocking the audience. That's what you want to do. That's what horror and thrillers are all about. You're going to turn the whole thing on its head, and I get a real kick out of that.
With the screenplay, when you started writing it, what sort of kept you going through the writing process, and what was your method?
Well, I think it was kind of taking my encyclopedic knowledge of film and horror and using my own knowledge married with the text that I'd learned from the Sid Field book and that course. And just kind of amalgamating, putting it all together, and going, I guess, also deep into my psyche, and also the research and knowledge and time I've spent on the subject was pretty good, And I'm not going to say I know everything, of course not, but I knew a lot about the subject, and I'd researched it and delved into it a bit, so it kind of came very naturally. When I was in high school, it was a real peak time for a lot of I hate to say this, but there was a lot of satanic worship, and there was a lot of crime involved with it as well. And there was an amazing documentary that came out. I don't know if you've ever seen this. It was called The Devil Made Me Do It.
No, I don't think so.
I'll send you a link because to this day, it is the best documentary I've ever seen in my life.
Really? Okay. Well,
it is absolutely fascinating, and it will literally turn your head. You will be flabbergasted at what goes down in this doco. And so I used that as kind of like my blueprint to get inspired to do that screenplay. And because it was all based on facts, it was based on things that had actually happened. So I investigated that myself. That took me on a whole journey. In about year 9, I think it was, I, by default, had been hanging out with a group of kids at school that had been involved in some of these satanic gangs where there'd been some crime. Someone at school had passed on my name, and someone from like Channel 7 rang me. And they said, look, we're doing a scoop on this satanic worship and how it's it's out of control, and we understand that you've got knowledge into this area, and would you mind if we interviewed you? And I actually said no, because I was a teenager, and the school I was at least, if I had done that, I probably would have got bashed. So that subject had kind of been around me, and I guess I was protecting myself, but I was too young to understand all this, of course. This was when I was, a teenager. It was kind of scary time. I also ended up at the Haunted Bookshop. Have you ever been in there? Do you know the guy Drew? I think it's Drew Sinton.
No, I've never even heard of the Haunted Bookshop.
The Haunted Bookshop, I'm not sure if it's still there, but the guy that ran it, at least when I used to know it, he was also running the Melbourne ghost tours, the ones at night. So this guy's kind of like the Pied Piper. He wears a top hat and he walks around the city and he takes people on group tours and describes to them, a lot of the ghost stories and things that have happened around the CBD over the past 100 years. Mm-hmm. So this was the same guy that owned the Haunted Bookshop, and I found myself in the Haunted Bookshop one day, and discovered a lot of this kind of satanic material because they sell a lot of books on the subject. I think I'd actually gone in there to buy the Black Bible because I needed to know that the scenes I were writing were technically correct. Do Do you know what I mean? Like, it was kind of hard to stomach it. It's not the sort of stuff you want to like go out and read by choice because it's quite dark. And I'm coming from a Christian background as well, so it was pretty challenging. But I was probably testing my own faith and things like that. But I had to go in there to get technical knowledge. I saw a poster on the wall for an unmade satanic horror film.
Okay.
And at the bottom in the credits was Jamie Blanks. And I turned to the guy, which was actually Drew. Can you tell me about that? And he said, oh, yeah, this was Jamie Blanks' first screenplay that he wrote. It's a satanic horror, but it was unmade. And then he went on to do Urban Legend. And of course, Jamie I'd worked with on a short film called The Huntsman, where I was acting and he was a DOP. I had some chills because I was like, we've both got a screenplay that's like our first screenplay and it's a satanic horror. You know, I kind of felt like I must be on a right path in a weird way.
You went into the satanic bookstore, you did some research. How do Satanists feel about like a negative portrayal of their religion and even their God? It's a really interesting question because I think I actually said to the guy, because I was quite young and pretty ballsy and probably naive, how does one get into a black mass? I wanted to go and see someone do one. I wanted to film it and said, no, you have to register. You know, he's very serious about it. He's like, if you want to go to one, you've got to go to the website, which I think wouldn't have been a website. I would have had to call them and write to them because this was before internet. And you had to go to the church in America, and you had to register and you had to become a member before you were able to sort of delve any further. So there was a whole process to it. It was quite involved. The whole topic is scary. It is disturbing, and the subject is. I guess that's why we're talking about it late at night, and it's a full moon. You know, it's got that kind of feeling to it. You know, but it is a dark kind of thing. And you know, movies like this, you know, they're sort of. It was once said that the occult films can also kind of act as some kind of a curse. You know, there have been movies made like this that kind of end people's careers, you know, and I always thought, what's that about? And it wasn't kind of until I sort of embarked on the Black Mass journey that I realized I was kind of playing with fire. There was definitely something about this script that wanted to be made as much as it didn't want to be made, and that played out. So I don't know if you want me to elaborate on that now. Yeah, go ahead.
When we went into pre-production. So this script, which was absolutely adored by everybody that read it, at the time, my distributors that had done Tomboys, they said, we want to take this on board. We want to go for the big boys. We want to go to America. So we approached William Catt. We got him on board. Then we approached Julian Sands, from Warlock, and he said yes. He said yes. And I thought, well, this is amazing because I love Julian Sands. So, all of a sudden I've got these two kind of really iconic 80s stars. And I thought, well, let's keep going with that. So I'd always liked Salil Moon Fry, who played Punky Brewster. I wanted her as my lead female. And so I started tracking her down. And then I became friends with Corey Feldman's agent, which is a guy called Scott Carlson. And you can see Scott Carlson in the Two Coreys TV series. He actually plays himself in that. And I made friends with him, and then I got Corey Feldman attached to the script. And then because of that, I also got Corey Haim attached to the script as well. And then this was going to be a revamp of the Two Coreys. So, because my favorite film's The Lost Boys. So this was going to be like my kind of, homage to the 80s horror films. So you're going to have the rebirth of the Coreys. Now, funnily enough, Seb, during this process, they had their rebirth. They actually came out with the new Two Coreys TV series, and I can't help but feel like I played a part in that, because when I was pitching Black Mass, and we're talking to like every major production company in Hollywood, there was talk on the street, and there was Hollywood press. I think I had a column even in Hollywood Reporter. So this was a big deal. This was the Coreys comeback. We had William Catt, you had Julian Sands, all this sort of stuff. And this was going to be a massive revamping. From my point of view, it was almost like, okay, I've made this little independent, marginally successful film called Tomboys. I've done my little Australian feature.
Very successful.
And now I'm going to go and make my American commercial film. This is the big ticket. What actually happened in the end was that the two things happened. One was Corey Haim died, and that was devastating. I've actually stayed in touch with his mother, Judy.
That's nice.
But it was ironic because he died on the same day as my birthday. So this was like March the 10th. So it was like a really dark day for all of us. And the investor that my distributors at the time, production company Alliance, the primary investor they had, who was from Nevada, he became terminally ill. You know what? I think this movie just doesn't want to get made. Because this kind of busted up a whole team of people. You wouldn't believe this. I mean, I've got this movie already recorded in a table read, for God's sake. Like I've got a full table read with all the Melbourne cast that's been recorded. You can even watch this. The Coreys 3 days away, about to get on a plane to come to Melbourne to shoot the film. You know, like it was devastating. You know, so yeah, a really big deal. You know, but you got to look back in retrospect and say, well, you know, I was pretty young. Could I have actually handled that? Could I have, you know, what sort of person would I be today if that had have happened? You know, like I'd be a very different person. I don't even know if I'd be alive, bro. I might have burnt out. You know, I just don't know what would have happened. And this kind of takes us back to what we were talking before about the crossroads and the decisions in life. You know, certain things happen for certain reasons, and some things not happening take you down other paths. But for all you know, that is your destiny. Do you know what I mean? It's very hard to decipher sometimes what's good from bad and what's right from wrong. So you have to keep rolling with those punches. I think I felt better when I found out that Greg McLean had 2 or 3 features prior to Wolf Creek actually bomb. Like I heard a story where he was on set even. He was on day one and then lost funding. You know, like when I started hearing these kind of horror stories, it made me feel a bit better because when I crashed on that, I had probably had the equivalent of a nervous breakdown. You know, I mean, I just couldn't function. I was completely, you know, ruined. And I think because it was an occult thriller, people read into it and they go, oh, it's because it's about the devil. You know what I mean? And they take it too far. It's not that. It could have been any genre. It was just so happened to be, you know, a script that I was so passionate about. But when you have people telling you it's the best character piece they've ever read and they're from Hollywood, you know, you don't feel quite so bad. You know what I mean? And you kind of, you know, compared to, you know, what else is going on around town in Melbourne, which, let's be honest, sometimes isn't a great deal. You know, you don't feel too badly about it. But I think, you know, the Black Mass it's an interesting one because it keeps popping up. It'll come back up in my life and someone will say, oh, what happened to that script? And, oh, do you want to do this? And, oh, do you still want to do that? And I don't know, I've been, you know, I've been paying out on people doing crowdfunding because I've always, you know, if I want to make a film, I've always backed it myself predominantly and, you know, worked for the money and found the money to make a film outright. So I've always kind of felt like crowdfunding is begging. I've never really endorsed it. But I'm thinking maybe that with the Black Mass idea, maybe that is something I could attempt to do with crowdfunding and see whether there was any interest.
I'd say so, yeah. I mean, I've seen projects lesser than this get further, and it's amazing how far it's gotten so far with what you've told me. You know, table reads, you had big names attached to it, and you had mileage as well. You know, there's no reason why, you know, people wouldn't be interested in reviving it if you felt that it was right to go.
It's interesting because it wasn't until I met Dean Kirkwright on Cold Girls that I thought there's a guy that could play Trent. And I had a chat to Dean just after Cold Girls because, you know, he's kind of semi-retired from acting. He's taken a break. And he said, you know, I think I might even quit. And I said to him, well, I might have one more for you. And he said to me, he said, Nath, for you, I'll do it. He said, for you, I'd come out of retirement. I said, well, that's an awesome compliment.
How old is Trent? I mean, how old is the actor?
Trent character is definitely late 20s, so he could do it. I mean, Black Mass, as you know, it's set in a university. I'll just read the summary here so people know a bit more about what we're talking about.
Good idea, yeah.
So we've got 2 friends boarding together at a rural university campus that are unaware that the entire facility is run by a cult that plans to sacrifice the both of them at a ritual. So pretty awesome summary. So these two university students. So you've got Trent and Jai, and Dean was someone I could imagine playing Trent. You kind of straight-laced, down-to-earth, humble kind of lead guy who wants to just kind of get his degree done, and he's been one of those guys that's finished high school but then gone kind of off the rails a bit and partied a bit too hard, and then realised, oh shit, if I don't go to uni, get a degree, I'm always going to be working class. And so, but because his grades are so low, he can only get into a university that's kind of rural. And he kind of loses a bet with his other friend Jai, because they're both these guys that have been contemplating going back to uni, but they're embarrassed because they're now a bit older, and they have a drinking game, and they kind of lose. Someone loses the bet, and then they actually enroll, and they get into this university that's in the country, and so they sort of say to themselves, okay, well, we'll go and do it together. At least if we've got each other, it won't feel so bad, and we're so isolated, because they're city slickers at heart. So when they go out to that rural university, obviously it's kind of like fish out of water. The town they go to is where Trent was born. So there's a few characters that start to pop up, that people that actually know who he is. And because you know what it's like in those small country towns, everyone knows everybody. They know your dirty secrets, and they all kind of conspire against you, and they backstab you. That's what these towns do. So they're all talking about each other. So they kind of realize pretty quickly, oh, hang on, that's Trent Newman. And what the boys don't understand, or the young men, I should say, is that this whole town is run by a cult. So it's got that sort of Rosemary's Baby element to it, where the school principal and the police chief and the doctor and the psychiatrist and all those heads of departments, they're all kind of Satanists, and they're the real ones controlling the town. When his kind of identity is discovered, he also doesn't realize that he's part of what they consider to be an unholy bloodline. And then he has to find out, unfortunately for him, that his mother was a part of this cult in this town, and he has to come to grips with his entire identity. And in that process, fights with his friend, and his childhood sweetheart comes back into his life, and she's desperate, and she's being kind of hunted by another Satanist. And I mean, you've read it; it's just a cocktail. Do you know what I mean? It's an amazing piece. It's very exciting, and one thing I like about it, which is akin to Lost Boys, is it's got good placement for music. It's got a killer, ensemble cast, amazing locations, killer dialogue, one-liners that you need for cinematic appeal. There's so many pluses to this screenplay. It really is my kind of baby. It's my little masterpiece. So I think it's got a bit in there for everybody.
And I think its strongest point is its characters. And if you place those characters who are well drawn out and ones that you care about in situations where they're vulnerable, it really works. And in the example, Trent has an ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, that's the Christie character. That's what I was talking about, the old childhood flame. Yeah,
exactly. And so you've got that notion of her being pregnant in the most vulnerable state that a human being can be in, basically, aside from asleep.
Correct.
And you've got that in line, and it's really, that melodrama or that drama really works to service the characters, I feel.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's been very well thought out. It's already been rehearsed. Like I said, there's already been a table read that was filmed. There's been, it's literally even gone through rehearsal periods where actors are ready to get on set and perform it. Like, it's a very advanced screenplay. It's kind of like if a Hollywood exec rings me tomorrow after we've done this interview and says, okay, what do you got? They're going to get this script. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's ready to go. And I think the great thing about it is not just it's ready to go, but that it's a heavyweight script ready to go. It's not a first draft. It's like draft 24 now. And it can go into production. Do you know what I mean? And I was talking to Mark Bacchitis about this recently, because we've often toyed with the idea that maybe we would do this film as our next piece. And I've said to him, look, mate, it's so simple, because as you know as well, Seb, the first two acts is all drama. There's There's not a lot to it. It's not going to be an expensive production. The money really only comes into third act when you start getting into some of the crazy cult stuff. But a lot of it's just clever art direction. It's not even really, it doesn't even call for a massive budget. I mean, it's similar to what we saw in The Devil's Reign. They're literally at an abandoned church, and then they've just got a one set piece interior studio to match it. A lot of the stuff I do is location. Do you know what I mean? So there's not a lot of set building that needs to be done. It's not an expensive film to make as far as your structure goes.
Have you done location scouting?
I did. I found. I've already found a. Actually, do you know what's funny? You said that because I really imagined the town would be something similar to Bacchus Marsh. It's got that kind of dreary landscape where it's kind of suburban, but it also feels flat. There's not a lot of trees. It's quite barren.
Nowhere to hide.
And it's got those creepy graveyards, and it's got those old churches that look kind of frightening, at dusk and things like that. So it's it's definitely got that vibe to it. There's a couple of places, as we know, in Victoria that do look American. Obviously, Salem's Lot is one of them, where they shot the Salem's Lot TV miniseries with Rob Lowe. They shot that out in Daylesford.
I auditioned for that for shits and giggles.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. For the role that I don't remember his name, but he's an Australian actor, and the role was the I guess teenage adolescent who kind of a bully, and the line that we had to read was, "Hey, go wash my car." And obviously I didn't get it, but you know.
Do you want me to tell you something funny? You'll love this.
What?
I had a friend from film school, a girl that was very competitive towards me, and I think she was just born with a silver spoon up her ass kind of thing. And she eventually got a job as a production assistant, and she worked on that. She worked on Salem's Lot, and she thought she'd hit the big time. And I found out that she was actually working as Rob Lowe's personal assistant.
Wow.
And that sounded like a pretty big deal. But then I sort of delved into it a bit deeper and found that she also had to do things like flush the toilet for him. And so I kind of, I felt like I was getting the last laugh because she was quite proud of it. But the job didn't really sound that glamorous after all. Grandfather, he was a pianist, and he was responsible for a lot of my kind of grooming as a filmmaker as a child, because he would screen silent films, but then he would score live. Wow. In the living room. So I'd be watching 8mm black and white, Boris Karloff, Bela Lugosi, and he'd be on the piano scoring it live for me. So it was like my own bloody show. It was unbelievable. So music played a very major part in my filmmaking process. So I would definitely go into a trance. I would definitely find particular types of music that will get me into the mood and then into the mindset that would take me into, I guess, the realm of the black mass world. And I think if you look up a lot of David Lynch's techniques, they're very similar. I mean, he uses a lot of transcendental meditation. It's very similar. I mean, it's just being calm and letting your mind wander into a void where you can delve into a pool of the ideas. It takes a lot of skill. A lot of people can't do it. And I think this is probably what, differentiates a director from someone that's not a director. You can kind of do that or you can't. But then it's about how do you translate that? Do you know what I mean? It's like, how do you translate an idea or a vision you've had onto a page that's scripted, that makes sense, that's relevant, that's even worth talking about? And how do you take multiple characters on a journey that all comes to a head and not only makes for a killer story, but is entertaining, that's going to make people want to pay to see it? I mean, this is, just look at the spectrum there of how broad the strokes are to get to that point. It's quite enormous, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I can only imagine the actual process, though.
You've been on sets. You understand filmmaking.
Yeah, and I guess an efficiently run set is one that has efficient communication. That being said, I think the only drawback for a lot of the film sets that I've been on, they didn't really have a lot of good communication. But that being said, the film set that I did work on as a sound engineer, that was different. But observing them, it was, it's quite poor communication.
It's an interesting point that you've raised, because that is definitely relevant, because you can hire a group of professional filmmakers to do a job and they'll make a film, and that's one thing. but then you can have a group of passionate people all sharing a vision that's greater than just being paid to do it. The movies where I think you've got the creativity and the money are your Tarantino films. You're seeing passion, something a little bit different to the norm, but it's also been funded. And that's kind of what I think every filmmaker is striving to get to, is to a place where you know you've got the goods, but you just need that bit of money to push you over the edge, and that's kind of where I'm always at. I'm always in that place of struggle of like, but if I just had this much, like my agent once said publicly, give Nathan Hill $1 million and you'll get the next Apocalypse Now. You know what? With $1 million, Jesus Christ, you know what I could do? Oh, God, Seb. I mean, it'd be friggin' epic. Do you know what I mean? Because the passion would then be fueled, and then that would fuel everyone else, and then that would just have a rippling effect. I mean, I really love movies like The Warriors. Walter Hill, someone that like was doing low budget, but indie, but on such a scale where there was just so many people backing him, and there must have been thousands of people in that. They're the sort of movies I really love, where you can tell it had a budget, but it was made because it was bigger than the script. It had an enigma attached to it.
Yeah, and he also had the organizational skills and the directorial skills to pull off such a feat. His first film was Hard Times with Charles Bronson, and then he moved on to Driver, and then he went to do, which is my favorite Walter Hill, and next to The Warriors. They're my two favorite Walter Hill films. But before that, awesome. He was working as a second unit director for Sam Peckinpah, and eventually ended up writing for him as well.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
So he was very, very, he's a very astute filmmaker, and I can see the resemblance between him and you. That sort of gravitation towards the passion and the drive. However, listening to him in interviews, he's a lot less vocal than you are. He's a strong, silent man type. But
no, I'm glad you said that. You just made me think of something else, because when I was doing an interview with Mark recently, and he said, he said, I just love it when you're on camera because you were so vocal. And I've had a friend also, another filmmaker, say to me that when they see Tarantino interviewed, that they've kind of felt like it's what it's like when I talk to them, in a sense that it's, I am very vocal, and I'm very passionate about, like, if I'm into something, then everyone else is. Do you know what I mean? I will convince you whether you liked it or not. And I think that's great. And I think I've probably got that from my acting, because the acting, which actually gives you a lot of confidence and gives you those skills, has helped me with the filmmaking. I think if I didn't have the acting and the producing and the casting and those other skills, I wouldn't be as great a director as what I am either.
Getting back to budget, I remember actually reading an interview with Roger Corman about the very first studio film that he made for a studio. For St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which we covered on a previous podcast, I think. So he was given $2.5 million to make the film, or $2.1 million, I think. And he said that without a studio, he could have made it for $1.1 million, because you got the overheads of everyone within the studio taking 20% off the top each time that the budget goes through them. You got this stock of people, technicians, working to service your vision, but at the same time, they take off quite a substantial amount of money. That's well deserved. Now, in a lot of the Australian production that I did observe, the majority of the people were working for free. There were no budgets. I mean, they could barely even afford food on the set. And in fact, I think if they didn't have food, there would have been a bit of a revolt. But
well, this is the thing. Yeah, there's got to be there's certain things that have to be in place with some of these indies, and even a no budget indie, there's a few things you have to have, otherwise you just cannot even make the movie. And and that's number one is catering. I mean, I don't care if you've got no budget, you have to provide food. And also you will find it almost impossible to not pay a makeup artist for their materials. There's certain things that are just basic scale, even on a no budget. There are a few things that you still have to do. And if you don't do them, you will not get the product that you're after. It's just not going to happen. It's a pity I haven't been on one of my movies yet. Do you know what I mean? Because I get people like you coming to me often and saying, they've had this horrible experience. And then when they sort of get onto one of mine, I look after them and I show them what the process is really supposed to be like. And then they're very grateful for that. There are so many filmmakers making movies, but not all of them understand what the basics are. and it's scary because you'll come across even so-called, renowned filmmakers, and you'd swear they just don't really know what they're doing. I mean, it's really scary. It's what I say to actors about auditions for projects. If they're an unknown, please do your research. Get online. It doesn't take you long to friggin' Google and find out whether this guy's got a Wikipedia or a bloody Innocence page or an IMDB or a Star Now or whatever. Do the friggin' research, because you don't want to just go and kind of, prostitute yourself on someone else's vision because you happen to have a great coffee with them that afternoon on bloody Logon Street. That might not be enough.
That makes sense, yeah.
And I just think it's the whole stigma attached to movie making. People think like, oh, it's a feature. I used to call it the boy who cried feature. It's like, oh, so you're making a feature, so you must be a legend. The other thing that annoys me is the term feature. People use it so lightly. But you know what? If you look up the definition of a feature film, do you know what it means? It actually means a movie with a pre-distribution guaranteed that is probably a theatrical release. I have so many people telling me they're doing features and they don't even know what a feature is.
Especially for someone like yourself who does work so hard to get to that stage of calling your project a feature.
Well, it's got to have a release. You can't, you've got to have distribution. I mean, I've got, several distributors now that will take my work regardless of what I do. Do you know what I mean? That's a beautiful place to be. And I kind of realized that today, Seb. I was reflecting, probably because I've been a bit sick and I had some time off. And I was thinking, you know what? Right now, I'm in a better position than what I was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I didn't have a few distributors that would take my movie regardless of how bad it was.
Sure, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like today, I do have them.
Well, I can't imagine you making a bad film, but yeah.
Well, thank you, bro. But I have made a couple of films. I wouldn't say they're bad, but I've made a couple of films that I don't think are that great, and that's okay, because you have to. As a filmmaker, you have to make a bad film. You can't. It's impossible to keep making a masterpiece after masterpiece. It doesn't work that way. You have to fail. You have to make bad films to go, oh, God, I don't want to do that again. Or, Jesus, I don't want to make that mistake again. How do I improve there? The journey's not even exciting anyway. There was an awesome line in, that movie with Hopkins and Ryan Gosling, the thriller. Yeah. Hopkins kind of turned to Ryan Gosling in the scene, and the character says, do you know what your problem is? And he goes, what's that? And he goes, you're a winner. If someone's only used to winning, it's kind of boring. And I feel it's the same with my screenplays. If it's the same thing where the hero just wins all the time, it's boring, man. I want to see some road turns. I want to see some roadblocks. I want to see some tragedy. There's nothing like a tragedy to make a better person.
It's like a screenwriting device right there. You in order to make conflict, just put two winners in a room that have different goals.
Put two professional boxers in a room, and you see this. You see two winners. I just was watching bloody Anthony Joshua in a thing, and he was in the room doing a spitball with another guy who was a heavyweight in his own right, and they're basically two winners. Put him in a ring, boom, someone's going to lose. And that's what interests me. I mean, films like Taxi Driver, Rolling Thunder, these movies where it clearly is an anti-hero. Another one, I don't know if you've seen many James Woods movies, but have you seen Boost?
Yeah, with the woman from Blade Runner.
Blade Runner, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what, man? I mean, I just rewatched that the other day. I was like, man, they don't make films like this now. That was really dark. You've spent 80 out of 90 minutes kind of wanting to like this guy only to end up hating him. And I kind of like movies like that. They're different. They're not boring, because the movie I've just made, Eye Portrait's a bit like that. It's got characters that are kind of anti-heroes. So I think you'll like that.
And before we get back onto Black Mass, when you're writing, you said that you get into a certain headspace.
Yes.
If the characters are quite dark, does that tend to fuck you up?
There was one point in my life where I was so engrossed in the story. It was kind of enveloping my entire, subconscious, But you got to do that, man. You got to go there, right? Like if I get like take this for as an example. If I'm on a roll, like when I wrote the screenplay to Utterson, I sat down probably at about 8 p.m. I started pumping the coffees. I must have had like 7 coffees. I would like my hands were shaking. Do you know what I mean? I'd had that much caffeine, and I was writing all night into sunrise. And you kind of get into a rhythm where you don't want to stop. If you stop and then you go back to your normal routine and you sleep and you get up and all the bullshit that goes with your daily routine, you do lose rhythm. So whenever you kind of get to that first draft, this is a tip, this is at least how I do it, when you're in that first draft, as soon as you kind of hit the ground running, you've kind of got to try and finish that first draft as quick as you can, because you can rework it later. So for me, typically, it'd be 30 pages a day over 3 days, 90 pages. That's your first script, your first draft over 3 days.
And that would impress someone like Paul Schrader, who said, I think in a book on screenwriting, if someone approaches him in like a university or something like that, I've written a script, it took me a week to write. Would you like to read it? More often than not, the answer is yes. My film school buddies were absolutely kind of just gobsmacked that I had done this script in 3 days. They just thought it was ridiculous. They didn't believe me. They had to read it for themselves and then go, holy shit, this is mad. And I said, well, in my world, it's not, because isn't that what you do? You're passionate, you've done your research, you're inspired, and you want to make this movie, you want to write it, fucking write it. Really good screenwriters and experienced screenwriters. It doesn't take them that long to get out of first draft, but what it is, it's the build up to get to that point. It's the development stage that you've got to research. You see, you might develop an idea for 6 months, but then all of a sudden the screenplay comes out in a very quick spurt. I think in the case of Utterson or Black Mass, the reason why I wrote those drafts so quickly is because I'd actually developed them for a long time. Okay, so Black Mass, what are some of the highlights of the story that you feel that you can divulge without giving away the plot? Like the story itself, and then maybe the characters, overall the atmosphere of this. I
think as far as a poster goes for the characters, it's really a smorgasbord, because, you've got all ages. There's kind of a character in there for everybody, because you've got your handsome lead males, but you've also got your gorgeous lead females. Then you've got your middle-aged kind of mums and dads, and then you've also got your old school kind of principals and doctors and priests and things like that. So, as far as sort of age goes, there's kind of someone for everybody. And as far as kind of landscape goes, it's the same. I mean, we're interior and exterior, and we've got rundown places, but we've also got newer buildings. And I think as far as a cult value goes, you've got there's placement there for a band. There's a spot there for perhaps a death metal band or something like that. So there's a lot of dream sequences that go down, because as you can remember, there's characters are drugged. They are high on drugs.
Yeah. And
so there's a lot of hallucinogenic themes to the film, which gives us a chance to get very creative. So, you even see the devil in one shot, or what appears to be kind of a Luciferian character, and that's when one of the guys has had his drink spiked, and it's just bathed in that world. That's very rich in color. It's very black. It's very red. It really has got it all. It's not a difficult film to make. A very passionate project is what it is. After having lived with the screenplay for must be more than a decade, I'm still as passionate about the story today as what I was 10 years ago. So that says something, because there are other scripts I've got that I'm not, and I think this is what kind of defines a timeless film.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so if Tomboys was your conversation, then I guess Black Mass would be your Apocalypse Now.
Now you're talking. That's exactly right. And with this film, I have put it on ice for so long, because I had those American stars attached, and I was so, it's just so set on it, that when that didn't happen, I think I was heartbroken. And I think it's taken me this long to just consider putting local people into it. And it's only been in the past couple of years where I've started to meet people where I've thought, you know what, they could play Christie, or they could play Trent, or they could play Alan Flenge. Those characters are all starting to kind of pop up. So, and I mean, look, I don't know if Neil at Monster Pictures is going to listen to this interview, but this is definitely something that like Monster Films should have got on board.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, one of my other execs from Sydney, Peter Castaldi, has said it live on air. I mean, this guy used to run the whole film show on the bloody Triple J. He has even said it on air. He's like, I don't understand. You've got Nathan Hill sitting there with all this passion and all this experience and all this knowledge. Why aren't they funding this guy? It's almost absurd. This is a movie that I haven't made, and I really wish I could get it made, but I want to do it justice, and I don't want to do it on a no budget because it's a really bloody good script. It needs to have some funding. I had a mate say to me, "Why don't you go to South Australia?" Because South Australian Film Corp, they're really kind of more open to the idea of funding Australian horror films. If you do go there, 75% of the crew have to be from South Australia. It's not that I'm not interested. I just haven't embarked on it.
I think that's a good idea. I mean, you're not making the film for your crew.
No,
you're making it for the audience and also yourself too.
I'd have to check into the clause with cast because, definitely I would want to use a Melbourne cast. So it's something I'd need to look into. Oh, but look, mate, if this movie ever did get up, it's a smorgasbord of creativity. It'd absolutely rock the house. I've got no doubt.
Getting back to the script, what are some of the favorite things, your highlights for the script? I know you love the whole thing, but what stands out amongst everything else?
I think what stands out is what I'm really strong at, which is peer group pressure. One of the things I'm really good at directing is young people undergoing some kind of pressure. You see it in Tomboys. You'll see it in iPortrait. There's a look that you'll get in most of my trailers. Usually it'll be Dr. Jekyll turning the cheek, or it'll be William Trigger in Seance, shocked at something that's just happened. There's a certain style I've got where it's kind of shock factor and its intensity, and it's built on my kind of claustrophobic style where you put a character into a pressure cooker situation and then see how they react. And Black Mash is exactly the same, putting characters into diabolical scenarios where they have to test their own soul, their own faith, their own reality. Instances in the Black Mash script where, you're seeing young people put to the test with their spirituality and their morals in this Black Mass script. And it's also a common theme with a lot of these Satanists. They do put these hallucinogenic drugs into the chalice that's passed around in these ceremonies, which people think they're drinking wine, and then they actually become, spellbound. And then that's when all of the rituals start, which become really horrifically hallucinogenic, and people sort of come out of these ceremonies not even remembering half of what happened. And diabolical things take place. Visually speaking, this is kind of like, a filmmaker's wet dream. You're talking about, all of the ingredients to make stunning visuals, and also musically driven pieces, which I'm very fond of. And actually, now that I think about it, most of Kubrick's films are musically driven.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And you mentioned your passion for Lost Boys. I can see a lot of resemblance of Lost Boys with the Black Mass script. You got the notion of people getting drugged. You got sort of youths as well, peer pressure, induction,
and transformation.
Yeah, transformation as well. I mean, how big a part did Lost Boys play into writing this script?
I think probably a bigger part than what I realized, and it's a subconscious thing. With a completed movie, you won't see comparisons to the timeline, though. Like, the characters are completely different, the story's completely different. It'll just be the themes, and some of the style might have a resemblance, or maybe more like an influence. But in a healthy way. I'm not trying to make a movie that's based just on reality that's going to depress everybody. It has to be entertaining. It might be hard to stomach for some, but at the end of the day, it's going to be an entertaining piece.
When I read the script, I got a lot of vibe of like this adolescence or innocence being threatened in the same way like with Lost Boys. It's sort of an induction into a corrupt form of adulthood. Same with Suspiria. Right. Same with, all of these films that have that X factor of, the destruction of innocence.
Oh,
and I think
absolutely.
that's a very appealing theme.
I think you're right, Seb, and I think the thing about this theme is that it never goes away. It actually gets reintroduced into every single generation. You're always being bullied in school. You're always going to get points in society where they draw parallels no matter what year it is. These challenges are always going to be there. It might be drugs, it might be alcohol, it might be spirituality. These themes are always going to be there.
Well, we'll wrap this up, but I will leave you with ask one more question. Where do you see this script? What stage is it at right now?
Yeah, look, I did another draft on it probably only a few months back because, as I said, I sent it into Shriekfest again, and we got into the quarterfinals. So I thought, well, it's still pretty fresh. So again, it's ready to go. It's really just going to come down to, is this going to be my 10th film? Do you know what I mean? Because I'm now turning a corner. If I make this film, it's technically my 10th feature. So I need to decide whether this is the next one, whether I am passionate about it to still give it another go, but there will need to be some sort of backing, whether someone like Mark decides to come on as a co-producer and we approach some of the people that have been coming to us or that at least he's been meeting during the Cult Girls journey. Mm-hmm. That could be an avenue to explore. There's also, as I was saying, that idea of maybe for the first time, maybe trying the crowdfunding because it's not something I've done before. Mm-hmm. But I think this is a sort of movie, though, where I would really need to be at the helms directing it, and it's not something I would be acting in. This would have to be, right back to the roots, where I would be putting all my energy into just making this film, not participating in it on front of camera.
Nathan Hill, thank you very much for talking with me about your script. I am going to be there every step of the way.
Pleasure, man, and thank you for listening. It's been great.
This series was produced by Sebastian Mittelman and devised by William Thompson and Sebastian Mittelman. Stay alive till next time. Oh, and a very special thanks to our associate producer Nathan Hill.